Hello, and welcome to En route. This is the podcast where we talk about the journey of life. I'm Dennis Sanders, your host. Have you subscribed to the show yet? If you have, thank you. If you haven't, well, subscribe now. You can subscribe to the show in various podcast platforms: Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and various others, and also via RSS. And when you do that, you won't miss a show. And don't just listen to this show. Leave a review. Leave a review on whatever platform that you listen to this podcast. And when you do that, you make it a lot easier for other people to find this show. You help it to the algorithms to make it easier, and it would be nice so that people can find this show. Also, did you know that En route has a YouTube channel? You can check out the show notes for the link. It's a great way if you want to listen to a podcast on YouTube. It's a good way to do it. So consider checking out En route and our YouTube channel. Well, to start off today's episode, I want to tell you a bit of a story. My brother-in-law's family live in Mayville, North Dakota. It is a small town that is, I would say, about midway between Fargo and Grand Forks. At one time, they had a small discount chain called Alco. Alco went bankrupt, and they closed that store in Mayville. And that wasn't great because there wasn't a kind of a retail or discount store for many miles. I mean, you would have to drive either to Fargo or to Grand Forks, and that's a good 40 or 50 miles in each direction. So the city was able to get Shopko to come. Shopko is another discount store. It was primarily in the Midwest. It was a chain that was found in small towns. But Shopko also went bankrupt, and the store ended up closing again. Shortly before Shopko closed, Dollar General opened up next door. And so, at least the town now has a Dollar General. But if you're looking for something a little bit more like a Target, well, you're out of luck. The Dollar General has lots of stuff, lots of cheap stuff, but it's not really good because, of course, it's lots of cheap stuff. There's an article in the Min Post. Min Post is a local newspaper here in the Twin Cities that explains that small towns are having trouble trying to use the space that is left when retailers like Shopko leave town. And more, it seems like those discount retailers like Sears or Kmart or JCPenney and others are disappearing from the scene. Now, most people will say that the reason that we're seeing these businesses closing, this what they call a retail apocalypse, is because of Amazon. But is that really the case? There is some evidence that maybe that's not true. And it's funny that there are some chains that are doing terrible here in America, but they're doing quite well in other countries. Sears is basically disappearing from the States, but it's doing quite well in Mexico. And the same goes with Kmart in Australia. So why are these stores doing so well in other countries, but they're dying here? Well, the problem isn't Amazon. It's finance. In short, it's private equity and hedge funds that are ruining American retail far more than Amazon ever could. CNN has done some great reporting on how hedge funds and private equity firms are wreaking havoc on American retail. And The Atlantic did a good report on the New York City grocery chain Fairway. Fairway was purchased by a private equity firm, and that firm pushed the chain into bankruptcy for the second time in 5 years. The the authors of that article, Eileen Applebaum and Andrew W. Park, explain how these firms end up hollowing out once profitable business. And here is a quote from that article. Most companies mean to stay in business for the long term, and those in the industries most exposed to the business cycle know that low debt and no rent are keys to surviving hard times and then prospering when good times return. The motivation is very different for private equity owners who operate under a shorter time frame, often just 3 to 5 years before moving on. For them, low levels of debt and high levels of real estate ownership present a get rich quick opportunity. The low debt means private equity firms can acquire retail chains by putting up very little of their own money and can take on high levels of debt that the company, not the investors who own it, must ultimately repay. The real estate gives investors an opportunity to sell off some of it and pocket the proceeds, leaving the stores to pay rent on properties they once owned. Especially attractive to private equity owners is the high cash flow in retail operations. Private equity owners have not been shy about putting their hands in the till to pay themselves exorbitant dividends. Unfortunately, private equity owners are far more accustomed to taking money out of retails than putting money into them, and the hollowed out chains they own are ill equipped to meet today's competitive challenges. Brick and mortar stores need to invest in e commerce, same day delivery, and technologies and logistics that success in retail now requires. While all traditional retail faces these challenges, chains owned by private equity make up a disproportionate share of businesses that have failed. This record is not just a product of markets, it's a matter of morality as well. Private equity firms profit as companies they own tumble into bankruptcy. And this is where my brother in law's story comes in. The Shopko store that I said was in Mayville closed, and this was because the chain ended up going bankrupt and it was liquidated. Shopko was owned by a private equity firm. And what that meant was the end of Shopko means that a lot of smaller communities throughout the Midwest are now without a good retailer. And a 2018 Atlantic article made a suggestion that um, says that there should be some type of a law that would make sure that these firms have some skin in the game. There are countries like Germany and Denmark that make sure that these firms pay severance, which means that they have to give something up before they lay off people. Some on the left want to go further and ban leverage buyouts altogether. On this episode, I talked to retail analyst Warren Shoulberg about the state of retail. We talk about the various factors that are affecting retail in America, but the conversation does focus on the role of finance. Private equity firms and hedge funds have seen retail chains as a good investment, and that does mean that they end up stripping a business of any value so that in order to pay the owner, the people involved in the private equity firms. And related to the role of finance, we are going to take a look at what really happened to Sears. Why is Sears basically out of business? And again, the culprit's not Amazon. With that, let's hear from Warren Shoulberg. Well, thank you, Warren, for joining me today.
Great to be here and look forward to our conversation.
Well, the first thing I wanted to kind of talk to you is about something that we always seem to talk about when we refer to retail, and that is Amazon. And I think, I was just reading this week that Amazon has eclipsed Walmart as the largest retailer, I believe, worldwide. Um, and that's kind of a big thing because I think years ago, Walmart was the big guy on the block. And it still is big, but this is kind of an important story. How is that, do you think, affecting retail?
So first of all, there's a certain irony in this. If for those of us who have followed the retail business for a long time, uh, Walmart. Uh, Hang on, are you hearing me now? Okay.
Yes, yes.
Um, so Walmart kind of ambushed the rest of physical retailers back in the 80s and 90s and the early 2000s, by these other retailers, big national retailers, whether it was Kmart or Sears or Penny's or any of the big national chains, didn't take Walmart seriously. They kept saying Walmart's this hick company out of Arkansas, and they're not really. We don't need to worry about them. And so Walmart, which was very good at what they did, so they still are, kind of blindsided everybody and took over the market and became the biggest retailer by far. And most of the rest of the guys that they competed with back then, most of them are out of business. So it's ironic that Amazon did the same thing to Walmart. Walmart essentially gave Amazon a 15-year head start in e-commerce. They kept saying this is not going to be big, and our customers are going to stick with us. And Walmart basically futzed around with their e-commerce strategies for years and years and years, going off and bad strategies and crazy tangents. And then they woke up one morning this week and said, whoops, Amazon is now bigger than us. So there's a certain irony in it. I think the other thing to remember is that Walmart has struck out on most of its global expansion. They've retreated from Germany. They've retreated from Japan. They've just sold off their British operation. They've gotten out of South America, and the only two overseas businesses that they still really have are China and Mexico. And so you think about Amazon, which sells globally. That's another big factor. Walmart has not been able to make its business model work overseas, and Amazon has. So that's a big deal, and there's no turning back. Walmart has finally woken up to this and is now doing the right things. But again, they gave Amazon such a head start. If Amazon controls 45% of the e-commerce business in the U.S. and Walmart is 8%, 10%, they're not going to catch up. So it's an interesting dynamic, and there's no danger of Walmart going out of business. Obviously, they're very successful and they are doing the right things, but Amazon, I think, is going to own that business.
Do you think Walmart will be able to kind of hold its own? I think back a few years ago to Best Buy, and I know that they were having some issues and problems, and then they, I think, really did put money into their online business, and it seems that they're doing well. I mean, it's not necessarily gangbusters, but they're holding their own to Amazon.
Yeah.
Do you think Walmart will do the same?
There's a lot of folks who counted Best Buy out, and they brought in a CEO, and I'm going to mangle how to pronounce his name, but Hubert Joly, I believe, is how he pronounces it. And he did a great job. And as you said, he doubled down on e-commerce, but he also doubled down on their stores. They made their stores a destination, and they gave shoppers a reason to come into their stores. They emphasized service, and they emphasized their knowledge of the product and installations and all kinds of things like that. And it was a smart strategy. So I give Best Buy a lot of credit for hanging in there and for growing. So they've done okay. Walmart, as I said, is finally doing the right things in e-commerce. They realized that their future didn't lie in buying upscale, obscure little fashion brands that didn't move their needle, but that their 4,000 stores were their secret weapon in dealing with shoppers. That they the whole idea of buy online, pick up in store, curbside pickup, all that kind of stuff, where they have a competitive advantage versus Amazon. They are finally using that and parlaying that into a strength. So you give them credit for that. Give them credit for the grocery business. They realized that grocery was also their kind of their Trojan horse into e-commerce. So they're doing good things, and so Walmart's going to be a very good number 2 in e-commerce, but I don't think they're ever going to be number 1.
Why do you think? I mean, this is a repeating story. I mean, why does it seem that a lot of the brick and mortar stores are so slow when it comes to e-commerce? Again, another example would be Borders.
Yeah,
I think for years they had a terrible online presence, and it seems, and basically never did learn. Why is it that the case that their brick and mortars don't seem to be willing to adapt to the times?
I think we're all creatures of habit, and we always say, well, this is the way we've always done it, and it's worked. And I think obviously the physical retailers were thinking that way. Again, a lot of them didn't take e-com seriously. They thought it was going to be about books and CDs and not about much more than that. They said people are never going to buy. There was the urban legend was people were never going to buy shoes online. Because that had to be tried on in person. And Zappos came along and said, And, Zappos solved that problem instantly by saying, buy 3 pairs, buy your size, buy a size smaller, buy a size bigger, just keep the one you want and return the other 2 to us for free. And all of a sudden that issue went away. So, all of this kind of thinking that people weren't going to buy certain products online just disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
People are buying $100,000 cars online and having them delivered to their driveway. So it's this myopia on the part of these legacy retailers has been just contagious, and you think back again to the department stores in the back half of the 20th century who said people are never going to buy apparel in a discount store, and we're always going to be able to sell them clothing and sell them makeup and perfume, and they're going to always come to us for that. And of course, that turned out to be wrong as well. And most of those department stores are out of business, and Target does a great job in apparel and in beauty. And so just this thinking that, this is the way we've always done it, and it's worked. And it turns out to be pretty bad thinking.
Well, if a brick and mortar company or someone were wanting to start, let's say, a retail business today, would it have to be? I mean, can a brick and mortar business survive in this climate today? And what are they going to be doing differently than they did, say, in 1971?
So again, I think we always need to keep in perspective that even after the pandemic, e-commerce is leveling off at a quarter, 25% of retail sales, depending on the category. And some categories it's lower, some it's much higher. But on average, I think when the dust settles, it's going to be about 25%. So, you flip that, 75% of retail sales are still done in stores. So stores are going to remain very important. And, it's why you're seeing Amazon get so active in the store business. I think a lot of people don't realize that Amazon has over 500 stores,
Hmm.
and they're not all Whole Foods. They've got bookstores, and they've got their own grocery stores, and they've got five-star stores, and they're testing all kinds of things. And so Amazon knows that they need to have stores, and I think any retailer knows that they need to be, what the industry calls platform neutral, or, basically, however the consumer wants to buy it, we're going to sell it to them that way. So whether that's online, in store, print catalogs, social media, however they're going to do it, the successful retailers are going to be able to offer it any way that they can, and any way that the consumer wants it. The whole idea of buying online, pick up in store, doesn't work if you don't have stores. So, I look at a retailer like Williams Sonoma
Hmm.
that pre-pandemic had almost a perfect balance of online versus in-store, 50-50. And obviously their online business has grown much faster, and probably 70% of their business is online now. And they're going to close about 100 stores over the next year or two, but that will still leave them, I don't know, 500 stores. And they're a great retailer because they figured out that different consumers want to buy different ways, and
Hmm.
so they've got stores, and they've got online, and they've got print catalogs, and they've got websites, and so to me, any retailer that's not offering that is in jeopardy. And in my mind, I tend to focus a little bit more on the home furnishings market. I look at Wayfair, which has one store, and Wayfair is going to need a lot of stores. And no matter how well they've done the past year online, they will need stores, and that's going to be a challenge for them.
Hmm. Well, moving on to private equity, that seems to be an issue that has, I mean, they're kind of a big business in and of themselves, but they've had an effect in retail. And I think, one of the biggest example was Toys R Us,
Yeah.
that was pretty much weighed down with debt that the private equity firm that purchased them basically took out.
Yep.
And there are other examples of across the country. How is that affecting retail? And is there a way of maybe taming private equity in that they're not wreaking havoc on businesses and then affecting people's livelihoods?
No. Private equity, with some rare exceptions, has been a disaster for retailing. You look at the track record, and you're absolutely right. Toys R Us is the best example of a pretty good retailer that was destroyed by private equity. Let's remember that the private equity guys, some people cry for them and say, "Oh my God, they lost so much money." They didn't lose so much money. They took out fees, and they took out special dividends, and they did all these things that they got their money out of it, and so they didn't lose any money. I mean, first of all, they were playing with somebody else's money, and those guys lost money, but the private equity firms themselves did just fine with this. I mean, there's a reason why those guys are so successful, and there's so many of them. It's because they make money. So they've been a disaster for retail. The list is endless of businesses that they've invested in. And there's very few examples of businesses that they've invested in where it's worked out well. And frankly, I can't think of one. I mean, there are some, but uniformly, they have been bad for the retail business. It just doesn't lend itself to that. Frankly, private equity guys have not been great for a lot of businesses, but particularly retail.
Why is that? What is it about private equity that makes it, and retail, that makes it a bad combination?
So the retail business, unlike some other businesses, does not throw off a lot of cash. The private equity model depends on generating a lot of cash that can go down, that can go to pay down debt and get the balance sheet in better shape that they can then return to the public market or be sold to another investor. And the retail business just doesn't make that kind of money. Um, good retailers make decent money. I mean, again, we talked about Walmart and Amazon and Target. Those are very profitable companies. But the companies that private equity guys tend to buy, first off, are usually pretty sketchy businesses to begin with, and so they're just not doing well, and they can't generate the cash. So by the time you load on that debt and put on the extra fees and pay the special dividends, there's no money left, and there's no money left to reinvest in the company. You look at Saks Fifth Avenue now, which technically it's not a private equity investor; it's a REIT, a real estate investor. But all the things that they are doing to monetize their business, all of these things, all these steps, and they're splitting their physical retail from their e-commerce retail. They're putting in some WeWork stations. They've sold off bits and pieces of things. All of those things are designed to make the company more profitable and return more money to their owners. They've done hardly anything to invest in the retail business. Yes, they did remodel the flagship store on Fifth Avenue. To my mind, not very well, but they did spend a lot of money on it, and they did have, I'm sure, good intentions. But almost everything else they've done has been to improve their balance sheet, not their core business. So you got to look at these guys and say, what are they doing to fix their retail business? And in most cases, it's hard to find.
So it sounds like basically what they are, I mean, obviously they're looking at making money off of these businesses, but is it that the profit margins aren't going to be that great, and so they're looking for whatever they can to get money, whatever is of value?
The private equity model is it's hopefully based on a cash out at the end. But if they buy 10 businesses and one is successfully flipped, they generally that's a ratio that they're willing to live with. If you're a baseball player and you're batting 100, you're not going to be in the leagues very often. But private equity guys are. So yeah, their business model is based on getting fees, on paying their executives consulting fees, on issuing special dividends, and on taking cash out of the business on an ongoing basis, whether it's making money or not. And I'm painting a broad picture here, and there are exceptions, and some private equity guys are better than others, but generally that's how they operate, and it doesn't work, at least not in retail, in my mind.
Why? I mean, is there any way for, I don't know, society in some way to fight back against some of these private equity groups? I don't know, shareholders or whatever, because it seems like they just kind of waltz in to whatever business, do what they do, and then either sell that business to someone else, or that business goes out of business.
Yeah, it's capitalism, and it's it's the system that we've got. The only way that government ever steps in is when they think that a purchase is going to create a monopoly. They've done this with the office office goods area where Staples has been trying to buy Office Depot, I think 3 different times over the last 10 years, and they've blocked it at least twice, and I can't keep track anymore. So, that's one option. In my mind, this comes back to the board of directors and their lack of fiduciary responsibility for the good of the company. A guy comes in, with some shiny beads and says, "We're going to give you this money right now," and that's what they do. And so the whole board of directors system, in my mind, is a big problem in this, and ultimately the culprit for why these companies are sold. I mean, the board could say, "No, we don't want to sell," and public companies, the shareholders ultimately make the decision, but the boards have a lot of power, and they could fight these things more than they have.
Is it that it's looking more in self-interest than it was maybe 30, 40 years ago, where people, you hear about companies where they were really more interested in the company and interested in trying to do the best job in that company, whereas now it seems, here's some money, we're going to make money out of this deal, and damn it, everything else.
Yeah, and again, it's hard to make generalizations, but 30, 40 years ago, a lot of these companies, particularly retail, families still had a big stake in them, and still had a longer range view. And you look at Nordstrom's and Dillard's, which are still basically run by their families and controlled by the families. These guys have resisted doing anything foolish financially. Because the family still has a stake in it. The family has their name over the front door. But that's not the case with so many other businesses, and so many businesses now, as the families have gotten out of it. Certainly there's no family in Macy's or Target, and again, not to imply that they're doing anything bad, but it's just. I think the diminishing role of the families has been a factor in all of this.
Mm-hmm. One other issue that is somewhat, I always want to, I guess I wonder if it is related to this, is the growth of dollar stores.
Yep.
Dollar stores have just kind of exploded in American retail. I can probably think in my own area, I don't know how many Dollar Trees are nearby from me. I mean, many of them. Is that true? Are they exploding? What does that say about retail right now, and maybe even about our culture, that these are becoming so popular?
So you're absolutely right. They are exploding. To put it in context, Macy's has 600 stores, Target has 1,800 stores, Walmart has 4,000 stores, Dollar General has 17,000 stores. And Dollar Tree, which owns Family Dollar as well, between the two brands, they've got, 15,000 stores. So it's an enormous number of stores. And, obviously this is not apples and apples. These stores are small compared to a typical Walmart supercenter, but they're everywhere. I lived in New York most of my life, and the dollar stores are not, do not have great penetration in that market or in the Northeast. But I moved to Atlanta a couple of years ago, and so I get out into the country areas a little bit more, and you go down into some of the smaller towns in America, and the dollar stores are the only stores in town, and it's 30 miles to drive to a Walmart. and 100 miles to drive to a department store. So these guys are the place to shop in small towns, and they're increasingly moving into bigger cities as well. So yeah, it says a lot about there's a lot of social ramifications of this. They don't pay very well. They're not great places to work from, as I said, from a payroll standpoint, but from a security standpoint as well.
Mm-hmm.
Their product mix is it's heavily skewed towards stuff that's not particularly high quality, and it's hard to do that for a buck. But their food stuff is it's a lot of salty snacks and a lot of sugar drinks, and they're trying to help on that. But this is what sells. If salads sold, these guys would have them. But we all want nacho cheese Doritos and a gallon of Coke. So this is what they sell, and they're just meeting the market. Other people will argue that they're driving this, and not that they're the cause and not the effect, but it's probably a little bit of both. So these guys are very very successful. It's not just those three chains. You've got Five Below has carved out its own niche, kind of going for a younger millennial customer or a Gen Z customer, and they're growing very rapidly. So the whole category is just exploding, and it's not going away. And again, they're filling that need kind of below Walmart, and so they're a fact of life of this. And I would group in two supermarket chains, Aldi and Lidl, which basically are again, they're 90% food and grocery. They have a little bit of general merchandise, but they're appealing to the same customer, which is a bargain budget customer, less concerned with branded goods, and again, they're very successful. Aldi, by the time this year is over, will be the third largest grocery chain in America. Wow. by the number of stores. They'll have about 2,300 stores, and Lidl similarly started much later, and I think they've only got about 200 stores, but they're going to grow too. So all of these retailers are serving a market need. So,
yeah, I think it's your talk about small towns is interesting. I have my brother-in-law's family lives in a small town in North Dakota, midway between Grand Forks and Fargo. So it's a drive to get to a Walmart or a Target or anything. They used to have what was an Alco store, and then that went out of business. Yeah, they were able to get a Shopko in, but Shopko was actually owned by a private equity. Yep. And they went out of business. Yep. But around that same time, Dollar Tree opened, or Dollar Tree or Dollar General. Yep. And basically that's it for that town, unless they want to drive 40 or 50 miles. So, yeah.
That's, even though rural America keeps getting diminished as a percentage of the population, it's still quite a bit of it out there, and those stores service it well, and they're in urban areas. Again, I said I'm in Atlanta, and probably within 10 miles of me, there's probably 25 dollar stores of one sort of another. So they're here, and and again, they wouldn't be successful if consumers didn't find a need for them.
Mhm. Well, the final thing that I wanted to talk to you about was the story of and kind of the downfall of Sears. Um, the memory that I have, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, is especially going to Sears that kind of sold everything. Um, and from clothing for school to the lawnmower that we owned. And usually the story that we hear about its downfall has been about Amazon, that it wasn't keeping up with the times. And that's why they are basically not existing anymore. But is that the whole? That doesn't seem to be the whole story. There seems to also be a lot of kind of what kind of started in 2005 with the merger with Kmart and with their CEO. Would you be willing kind of to share a little bit about that story and how that happened?
Sure. So I am a bit obsessed with the Sears and Kmart story. So been following it since I've been following it forever. I've been covering retail for a long time. So first a little context, which is that in the as recently as the 1980s, Sears was the biggest retailer in America. And as you said, they sold everything, and it's not unfair to say that they were the Amazon of the era. If you wanted something, you went to Sears, either their big catalog or their stores or whatever. And in their earlier days, Sears sold houses, they sold
Hmm.
cars, and even in the 1980s, they had a real estate brokerage company, and they had a credit card, which is the Discover card, and they had car insurance, and they were the place to go. Similarly, Kmart in the 1990s was the biggest retailer in America, and Kmart was a great store.
Hmm.
They almost were Target-like in terms of having some terrific apparel fashion, some interesting home stuff, and just having a little bit of an edge compared to some other retailers. And these were both good retailers, and through a variety of reasons, they started to decline. Some people say that both Sears and Kmart took their eye off their core businesses as they bought other companies, and I mentioned all the other things that Sears did, and some people criticized them for focusing more on financial services and real estate than on retail, maybe. But I think if they had successfully executed that strategy, that was a brilliant plan. Kmart bought or started a lot of other retail chains. They owned a home improvement one. They owned a warehouse club. They owned two book chains.
Hmm.
So they also had a strategy of we're going to have multiple nameplates under one brand. And again, people criticized and said that they then stopped paying attention to Kmart. To me, it's not so clear cut, but clearly, both Kmart and Sears declined as core retail businesses, and I'm going to say Sears made the fatal flaw in its retail business. You can trace it back to the 1940s when Sears started to expand into the suburbs. As the baby boom era started and people moved to the suburbs, Sears made a strategic decision to put its stores in shopping malls. Had they put those stores as in strip centers, I think they would have had a very different outcome. Um, this has been my theory. I'm not sure anybody else shares it, but you think about it. The shopping mall customer is not buying lawnmowers and power tools and work clothes and things like that. Those are being bought, today in Home Depot and Lowe's, which are in strip malls and or freestanding. So Sears made a big mistake that took 40 years to catch up with them, but it did. Kmart, I think, just stopped investing in their stores. So when Eddie Lampert bought Sears in 2000 and then he bought Kmart in 2005, they were both declining, but both still pretty good businesses. They had about 3,500 stores between the two of them. And there were a lot of opportunities there. They had loyal customers, and Eddie Lampert came along and said, he had a great press agent who said that he was the next Warren Buffett, and he was going to be investing in the businesses, and wasn't going to it was going to be a hands-off owner, and all of that turned out to be absolutely untrue. And his strategy from the very beginning was to pull cash out of that business. It was not to run the businesses. If it had been to run the businesses, we would have seen very different activities. But instead, they kept selling real estate, and it wasn't just real estate. They sold brand names. They stopped investing in their stores. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but you look at Sears Kmart's capital expenditure budget versus a Target, and it was a fraction of it. They just weren't spending any money to keep the stores modern and to keep the stores up to date. And both Kmart and Sears had a lot of old stores that needed a lot of work, and they weren't spending it. So this wasn't just a real estate play to sell off real estate assets. It was to keep spending to a minimum and keep drawing cash out of those businesses that went back to the shareholders, of which Lampert was the biggest shareholder. He had 50% of the company. And there were all kinds of things. The example I've used several times is Sears owned a regional hardware store called Orchard Hardware on the West Coast. And it was a nice little business. They probably should have never bought it, but they did. Somewhere along the line, they sold it to investors for a modest amount of money, and they took the proceeds from the sale and paid out a dividend to Sears shareholders, of which Lampert got half of it. And they then the new owners, and Sears was still a minority owner of it, 49%, I think. And again, excuse me for not having the exact numbers in front of me, but they then took out a line of credit of about $600 million. And this is my recollection, and I, again, may not be precise on the numbers. They took that $600 million and issued another special dividend to their shareholders, of which Lampert and ESL Holdings, which is his company, got $300 million of it. And Old Orchard now had $600 million in debt that they didn't have the day before. Within 18 months, Old Orchard filed for bankruptcy and was out of business. So, again, it was a plan to take cash out of it, to send that cash back to shareholders and not to invest in the business. If they had taken out a $600 million credit line and invested it in the stores, that would have been one thing. But that's not what they did. So this is what Lampert kept doing. He sold the big brand names, and so the store count kept diminishing. He took their best stores, their best performing stores, and sold those first because those were the most valuable assets, and those stores now have Targets in them or Home Depots. So when Sears Holdings filed for bankruptcy in 2019, they still had 1,800 stores, which was pretty significant. Lampert convinced the bankruptcy court that he was the best choice for keeping the company going, and they came out of bankruptcy in mid 2019 with 400 stores, and within a year they were down to 197, and now in 2021, and Transformco, which is the company that owns Sears and Kmart now, does not no longer answers questions or talks to anybody about what they're doing. They're a private company, obviously. As best as I can tell, and I talked to some other folks who are following it even more closely than I do, there's about 50 stores left between Sears and Kmart. There may be, I don't know, 30 Sears stores left and 20 Kmarts. And that's it. They're just not a player anymore. So it's a real tragedy. These stores might not have made it under the best of management, based on the competition from Amazon and Walmart. But it didn't have to turn out this way. They could have played a role, Yeah.
Why? I think because I've followed this story as well over the years, and the question I always keep having is, was anyone able to stop it? Or was this a case that everyone basically was in favor of it? They knew that they were going to get something out of it, some money, and so they just kind of let it happen.
Well, again, Lampert controlled the board of directors, and the board of directors basically rubber stamped his plans. And the shareholders were making money. The Sears stock in the first half of the first decade of the 2000s was a great stock to have. And a lot of people made a lot of money on it. And the decline started later on in the second decade of the 2000s. But as long as people were making money, that was okay. And they weren't doing anything illegal. I don't want to say anything like that. All of this was perfectly legal. And as the owners of the company, they could do what they wanted. And I think the misunderstanding is anybody who bought into the fact that all of these things were for the benefit of the retail business. I think that's the flaw, is that they were for the benefit of the investors and the owners, and they were to the detriment of ongoing retail businesses. And Lampert tried to sell this. He's a very charming, compelling guy. I spent a half hour with him once, and he was amazingly compelling in trying to convince me why all these things were good. And this was a long time ago. And if you came out of it and said, yeah, okay, I believe in this guy. And but it turns out he just had a different mission. And again, perfectly legal. Well within his rights as the owner of the company to do, and a brilliant strategy if your strategy is to make money.
A while back, I wrote an article kind of actually comparing Eddie Lampert with former President Trump, and talking about that they were both good at BS, of kind of spinning a story that was believable, but wasn't true. I mean, they were saying one thing and actually doing another, but what they were saying was so compelling that you wanted to believe them, to trust them. And I'm just wondering, did you see any connection there, or?
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't argue with that.
Okay.
They're both very good showmen, and you know, uh, Trump convinced 75 million Americans that he was the best choice. So he's really good at what he does, and Lampert is very good at what he does, and he's been, anytime anybody was trying to stop him or fight him, he was steps ahead of them, and had it figured out 2 years down the road. So they're both very good. And the link between the two of them is that Trump's was his Secretary of Commerce, Steve Mnuchin, Commerce,
Treasury.
Treasury. I'm sorry. Yep. Was on the Sears board for a number of years and went to college with Lampert. So I'm not saying that that there was any tie-in beyond that, but it's just an interesting little quirk of history.
One of the other questions that I have was the role of the media in this. There were stories actually about what was going on. If you read a few, I saw something like the Washington Post or CNBC or something. I think some of the local Chicago media, since that's where Sears was based. But in general, you didn't hear a whole lot about this story in the media, about what was really happening. And I've always wondered why, because it seems like the story that you would hear from the general story you would hear from the media is that simply Sears didn't keep up with the times.
Yeah.
That wasn't the whole story. And why do you think that the media in general didn't pick up what was going on with Eddie Lampert?
Yeah, it's a great question. Up until the last couple of years, you're absolutely right. He did a great job in getting great press for what he was doing, and the business press bought into it and did not question it. And even when things started to decline, and he was blaming Amazon, they bought into that too. But you think about it. Sears began life as a direct-to-consumer catalog business, and they were in existence, I don't know, 25 years before they opened their first store. So they had the model in place to continue, to transition it from a print catalog to an online business. And instead, they shut the catalog down. And I look at Penny. Penny did the same thing. That so Sears wasn't the only one. Penny had a great heritage of selling direct to consumer, and it's a tragedy that they weren't able to transition that. Compare that to, again, and I know I've gotten off tangent and I'll come back to you in a second. Compare that to who I mentioned before, Williams-Sonoma, which also had a heritage of selling direct through their catalog, and they were smart enough to transition that to selling online, and they were brilliant at it, and they still are. Sears and Penny's were not. So the business press, I think, and the general press just did not do their homework, and it's disappointing as a member of the press. It's not our finest moment. I will sound self-serving, but I have been. But I think I've been able to see through the Sears Kmart thing for a very long time, and it infuriated me when other media continued to drink the Kool-Aid and to buy what he was doing. So I don't know what the answer is, except they just didn't do their homework.
What do you think is going to be the result in retail of the loss of these two retailers and what Lampert was able to do?
So, first off, the Sears and Kmart names are going to live on in one form or another. When the current company eventually goes out of business, somebody will buy the Kmart name and they'll resurrect it in some form, and somebody will buy Sears name and resurrect it in some form. So those brands are going to stick around. As retail businesses, they're already gone. They're, with so few stores left, they're just not a factor at all, and they haven't been for 2 or 3 years. So the damage is already done. There's no more market share to divide up. Who's ever already taken it, whoever was going to take it has already taken it. So certainly Walmart and Target got a big chunk of it. Kohl's got some of it. The dollar stores got some of it. Yeah, the impact's has already happened, and I don't think when they go out with the final whimper, no one's even going to notice. But there will be sad stories about the demise of these guys, and they've been dead for years. Just no one's had the heart to tell them.
So when you say that I do agree, I think the brands will survive in some form. Do you think that would be restarting the business or doing like, Montgomery Ward, which has someone bought the name and has a website and all of that?
Yeah, it'll probably be the Montgomery Ward model, and that's who I was going to cite also. Just it'll be an online business. They'll talk about opening stores. You look at Toys R Us, and somebody bought the intellectual properties and said they were going to start online and they were going to open stores, and they did open, I think, 3 stores, and they were a very different model. And whether they would have worked or not, we don't know, because they went under during the pandemic. But somebody will buy them. They'll talk about stores. If the stores open, I'll be shocked. And there'll be online businesses. There's still a Sears hometown operation, which also Eddie Lampert now owns. And they have a couple of hundred stores, and these are kind of franchises. They're an odd mix of stuff, and they sell lawnmowers and appliances and some other odds and ends and repair stuff. They'll stick around for a while. Sears Auto, I think, still has some viability. Somebody will buy that. I've been shocked he has not been able to sell that so far. But I think so. We'll see Sears Auto stores, and Kmart probably not. Probably as an online business. But don't be surprised if somebody starts opening dollar format stores under the Kmart name. I mean, that's the scenario I see as if anything is going to work, it's going to be something like that. But big 100,000 square foot stores, no.
Okay. Well, thank you. This has been a great time of a great interview, kind of learning a little bit more about the retail here in the United States. And so thank you for taking the time.
Well, just, I always put the caveat, this is one man's opinion. Hopefully it's an educated opinion, but I have been wrong many times, and I certainly have my biases and axes to grind, I guess. But I think it's as good a take as anybody's right now.
All right. Well, thank you so much again, and take care.
Thanks, Dennis. You too. Stay well.
All right. Bye. I want to thank Warren for taking the time to talk with me, and I want to thank you for listening. Make sure to visit our website at enroutepodcast.org. While you're there, you can sign up to be on our mailing list of the newsletter, Letters of Transit, listen to past episodes, and read some articles that I've written. And while you're there, you can also make a donation to support this podcast. Also, I have basically edited just the portion where Warren talks about what happened to Sears. And you can find that it's a two-part episode. And it's under Little Jaunts, What Happened to Sears. And you will find it in this same RSS feed. And I would hope that you would listen to it and pass it along. It is a story that's not really heard, and it needs to be heard. Well, that's it for this episode of En Route, Notes on Religion, Politics, and Culture. I'm Dennis Sanders, your host. Take care and Godspeed.